Good afternoon and welcome to the National Source Water Collaborative's Learning Exchange webinar. My name is Karen Worth and I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Source Water Protection Team and a member of the Source Water Collaborative, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service and agricultural partners to protect drinking water sources. The Source Water Collaborative is a group of 28 national organizations that work together, all as well as individually, with their constituents to help policymakers, planners, agricultural interests, developers, citizens groups, and others to integrate source water protection into key decision making. Highlighted in red today are the organizations that are represented on this webinar or contributed to the planning of today's presentation. In 2006, marking our 10th anniversary of the Source Water Collaborative, we launched the Learning Exchange. The Learning Exchange aims to strengthen the effectiveness of source water practitioners across the country by providing them a platform to share experiences, transfer knowledge, and learn about funding and technical resources available for their efforts. The Learning Exchange provides a platform to host and share stories of success that showcase projects and partnerships making a difference in communities across the country and how others may duplicate their successes. Knowledge sharing events such as webinars and virtual workshops, opportunities to converse with peers through online networking and forums and social media, shareable quotes, graphics, and tips to support your organization's operations and outreach efforts, and finally, technical and educational materials developed by or recommended by the Source Water Collaborative member organizations and Learning Exchange participants. The Learning Exchange kicked off in August of 2016 and offered webinars, communications, and resources that are organized by themes you see here. All of the materials and supporting resources on each of these topics are available on the Source Water Collaborative website at sourcewatercollaborative.org/learning-exchange. Over the past 3 years, the Learning Exchange has offered several organized events, communications, and resources by theme. Building on several of these, we are adding new webinars and resources to several of these pages, including today's webinar, and additional resources will be added to the Source Water Protection through Conservation Funding Learning Exchange page. One of the reasons we thought it was important to update these resources was because on December 20th, 2018, the President signed the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, commonly known as the Farm Bill. That date marked the culmination of an extensive, long-term, and successful effort by our member, American Water Works Association, to make source water protection a priority within the U.S. Department of Agriculture conservation programs, and to designate significant funding towards those efforts. Conservation programs spend nearly $6 billion per year, providing a variety of support for environmental benefits. And although water quality has explicitly been recognized as a goal of these programs, source water protection was not an explicit focus. Under the new Farm Bill, 10% of spending on conservation title programs is to be directed to source water protection, providing at least $4 billion over the next 10 years. These programs are meant to assist farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to protect and enhance environmental outcomes that have benefits both on and off the farm. Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, is decentralized and organized at each state and in the state office, area offices, and multiple field offices, generally one in every county. So to facilitate the successful leveraging of these funds to protect source waters, utilities and states need to work with NRCS, state technical committees, and local work groups to help discuss and prioritize source water protection needs. During today's webinars, presenters will provide an overview of a few of the Natural Resources Conservation Services conservation programs, the requirements to establish partnerships to access those resources. Participants in today's webinars will also benefit from the expertise from those who are working in this space and learn from their expertise. And lastly, presenters will showcase efforts of drinking water utilities, state drinking water programs, and conservation groups who have partnered with farming operations and landowners to protect their water supplies through a few of the Natural Resources Conservation Services conservation programs. Today's presenters are Dee Carlson and Martin Lowenfish, who are with the U.S. Natural Resources Conservation Service headquarters office in Washington, D.C. Martin and Dee oversee the design and delivery of targeted efforts to deliver USDA's conservation programs, and their water quality efforts include the National Water Quality Initiative and the Mississippi River Basin Health Watershed Initiative. Next, we'll hear from Kari Cohen, who is also with the USDA NRCS headquarters office in Washington, D.C. Kari oversees a team responsible for a number of project-based programs at USDA, and including the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, Conservation Innovation Grants, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and the Wetlands Mitigation Banking Program. Then we'll hear from Jay Gibbs. Jay is currently serving as the acting state conservationist for the state of Oregon. He normally is a basin team leader in the John Day and Umatilla and Snake Basin in Eastern Oregon, a position he has held for over 25 years. Jay has successfully implemented multiple collaborative and partnership efforts across a broad geographic area with a wide cross-section of partners at the state, local, and national levels. Then we'll hear from Adam Schneider. Adam is the Water Quality Resources Coordinator and Acting Legislative Liaison for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. He has worked in a variety of roles within the DNR, and including coordinating the state's water quality standards efforts. And to bring us home, we'll hear from Jennifer Heyman, who is the Source Water Protection Program Manager for American Water Mid-Atlantic Division. She leads a team to identify and mitigate risks to drinking water supplies for approximately 75 water systems in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Jennifer is also the outgoing chair of the American Water Works Association's Source Water Protection Committee and Technical Advisory Work Group. Just a few housekeeping things here. We will not be taking any verbal questions today, but we will welcome your questions. So please add them into the chat box on your screen. And if there's a specific panelist you would like to answer that question, please identify them. We will respond to your questions after our speakers' presentations today. Please visit the Source Water Collaborative's Learning Exchange website to find more tools, resources, case studies, and recordings of today's and past webinars. And now I'd like to hand it over to Martin Lowenfish and Dee Carlson to get us started today. Martin and Dee.
Hey, Karen, thank you very much. Let's see, I've got the prompt. And let me know when you can see the presentation.
We sure can.
Terrific. Great. As you were introducing us, Dee and I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service of USDA, and we're going to talk to you a little bit today about the National Water Quality Initiative. And let me check just to make sure. Can you see this control panel thing in the corner of the screen, or is that hidden from you?
That's hidden.
Okay, terrific. All right. So the National Water Quality Initiative is a partnership that, like much of the work that NRCS does, is a deliberate partnership that we started off in 2012 with Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Office of Water, the state water quality agencies, and drinking water utilities for with the aim of water quality improvement, and now with source water of protection. As you can see from the map on your screen, it's nationwide. We focus on small watersheds and now small source water protection areas across the country, with the idea that we can work intensively in these small areas over a limited or a defined period of time and trying to achieve some meaningful acceleration of conservation to address water quality goals. So what are the operating principles of the National Water Quality Initiative? We talked about how there's this collaboration with state water quality agencies and state drinking water agencies. The primary mechanism that we have for that is that our state conservationists, and so NRCS has a state-based organization. There is a lead NRCS person in each state, and actually we have 51 of them because there's a Hawaii Pacific Islands region that encompasses both the state of Hawaii and the outlying Pacific Islands. And then there's also a Caribbean area director as that 51st state that then covers Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and other places in the Caribbean. So our lead, the state conservationist, works with the state drinking water agencies and the state water quality agencies to identify those locations where we want to do this additional targeted and accelerated conservation work for water quality. And that's facilitated by our partners at EPA, who help us work and identify with the correct partners at the state level. So the NWQI began with a focus on surface waters impaired under the Clean Water Act, either impaired or threatened with impairment. And we've recently, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, expanded to protecting and restoring drinking water sources, both surface and groundwater. The long-term goal of NWQI, again, as we stated on the slide, is to achieve these water quality improvements and to look, and we'll talk about a little bit about the metrics and the importance of tracking progress, is looking for a way where not only can we achieve water quality improvements and protection through agricultural conservation, which is the business of NRCS, but also that we can track that progress, follow those metrics, and continually improve the way that we are able to deliver these programs in a way that achieves these common benefits. There we go. So we talked about adaptive management, and Karen had mentioned that there is in this most recently passed Farm Bill a focus on drinking water. We didn't actually wait for this Farm Bill to come out. We recognized through interactions with our partners that there was a terrific opportunity to address source water protection through NWQI. And so in this previous fiscal year, we expanded the NWQI focus from that original priority of surface water and impaired water bodies. And in 2015, we added special consideration for selection for those watersheds that, while they had to meet that clean water criteria, also served as a drinking water source. And that came through some close work with our partners at EPA, regional coordinators who sort of surfaced this issue and actually the opportunity. So, and in 2019, this fiscal year, NWQI initiated a pilot to address source water protection, and that included, as we said before, surface and groundwater sources. The source water protection areas don't have to be tied to impaired waters now at this time, or anything that's listed, so we can really focus on protection, even if there is not an impairment there to groundwater or surface water. We have 15 pilot projects that are currently in place in 9 states, and as we'll talk about the future, we are expanding from this pilot, and we're going to make the opportunity available again in 2020 to build on these initial watersheds that were added to NWQI in 2019. And with that, I'll hand this over to Dee Carlson, who is our lead for NWQI and MRBI and the source water protection provisions of the Farm Bill.
Great, thanks, Martin. So first, as we discuss source water protection and NWQI, I just want to clarify that the delineations for protection areas for NWQI projects are not made by NRCS, but these are provided by our drinking water partners. Typically, when we refer to the source water protection area delineations, we're talking about those that were developed for the Safe Drinking Water Act, source water assessments that were done back in the late 90s, but certainly some of those may have been updated since that time. We do allow flexibility in these protection area boundaries that makes sense to best address the agricultural impacts. But again, the boundaries for the NWQI projects are provided by drinking water partners, either state agencies or utilities, and this is not something that's determined by NRCS. So just a quick overview of the changes for this current Farm Bill cycle. We started phasing these changes in this fiscal year, but starting in FY20, all watersheds and source water protection areas for NWQI must have two items that they submit. One is an assessment that meets NRCS guidance, and the other is an implementation plan that outlines the schedule of practices that are going to be implemented and the funding needs over the next 3 or 4 years. We currently have quite a few Clean Water Act watersheds that have been in NWQI since 2012 or 2013 that do not have an assessment or an implementation plan. So in getting ready for FY20, NRCS and partners will need to determine whether these should be continued in NWQI, and if so, how they will address the assessment that needs to be done. And then, as Martin stated, we think we have a fairly successful pilot project for source water protection that we have for FY19, and so in FY20, we will be continuing source water protection as a regular component of NWQI. Talked a bit about the source water protection assessments. Again, all watersheds and source water protection areas must have these in place for FY20. And we do have guidance specific to source water protection areas with required elements. I won't go into details here in this webinar, but these assessments will include a thorough analysis of the hydrology and water quality condition. They'll identify the critical source areas or vulnerable acres within source water protection areas. And as Martin stated, they'll have goals in place and identify specific metrics that can be used to measure our progress in meeting those goals. Proposed protection areas may already have some type of assessment or plan available, so NRCS and partners will need to determine if it has the right scale of analysis and the detail to inform conservation practice implementation. If it doesn't have all the required elements, then we'll talk about the readiness phase here on the next slide. So basically the timeline for FY 2020, the annual selection bulletin for NWQI should be posting this week. I'm sorry, it's a little later than anticipated, but it should be posting this week. And that bulletin has the assessment guidance as an attachment. If anyone needs me to provide that to them, just make a request, send me an email. I'm happy to send you our guidance for assessments for source water protection areas as well as for watersheds. I know many NRCS state offices have already begun talking to partners about source water projects for FY20. Again, if you are interested in being included in the conversation about state priorities for source water, you can contact NRCS either at the local level through the county office, or you can contact the state office. Anticipated source water protection area projects for FY20, again, should have assessments that meet the guidance if you are expecting to get financial assistance in FY20. If NRCS and partners have priorities for source water where the assessment doesn't have all the required elements, then those can be submitted as readiness projects, and basically we'll have about a year or so to complete that assessment. And NRCS can provide some assistance and resources for those assessments through the readiness phase. And partners often assist NRCS with these assessments. Approvals for FY 2020 watersheds and protection areas, we anticipate will be in October, and then approved implementation projects will receive financial assistance, and again, that assistance goes directly to landowners to install conservation practices that have been identified through the assessment process. So with that, Karen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dee and Martin. And next up, we will have Kari Cohen. Kari, I'm going to pull up your slides here real quick.
Thanks, Karen. Really appreciate it. Always difficult to follow my colleagues, Martin and Dee, but I will endeavor here. Again, my name is Kari Cohen. I work for NRCS and manage a group of folks that are responsible for all of our project-based programs. And what I'll talk about here today is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I don't really have much in the way of slides. I think Karen's going to pull up a single slide that just has the name of the program, and I'll talk about why that is here in just a minute. So RCPP has actually been around since the 2014 Farm Bill when it was created, and we currently have over 350 active projects out there across the landscape. RCPP is unique. It is partner-driven, which I suppose is one of the reasons I'm on here today. Partners propose projects based on natural resource concerns they want to address and also geographic areas. It's a competitive program, so we review applications when they come in and make award selections. And the thing about RCPP under the 2014 Farm Bill is that it was delivered largely through existing NRCS programs. So for example, a state agency could apply and say, hey, we want to do 500 acres of cover crops through EQIP contracts with producers, and we want to do 10 farmland easements through NRCS's ASEP program. And it was kind of a way to direct NRCS existing program funding. Now, when the program was reauthorized in 2018, through the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress made really substantive changes to the program. They're really going to change the way the program operates. We are currently in rulemaking and working very hard to deliver RCPP for 2019. And because of that, I can't really talk about too many specifics right now. But I will kind of give an overview of some of the major changes that anybody could glean from the statute. And the first thing I want to kind of emphasize is that the things that made a good RCPP project in the past will largely still hold and make good RCPP projects here for future years. And those things are innovation, how are partners proposing to do things through RCPP that we can't do through our existing programs like EQIP and our easement programs. Partner contributions are very important. The statute says that a significant portion of each project should be made up of partner contributions. Projects should be compelling, right? What is it, when you're thinking about a competitive program, what is it about your project that really makes it stand out and tell a story above and beyond, again, kind of sort of run-of-the-mill conservation activities. And then fourth is the strength of a partnership. We're really looking for a diverse coalition of partners that can bring a different, set of or a variety of skills to a project. And so all those things, the innovation, the contributions, the compelling story, the partnership, those things were true under the last Farm Bill, and those things will still be true under the new Farm Bill. However, how projects actually work and how they are administered will be changing substantially. And again, I will just kind of hit some of the big highlights here in the changes. So first of all, RCPP is now a standalone program with its own funding. So there may very well be some existing RCPP awardees on the line here with us today. We had some real challenges in the past with trying to manage all of the funding that came from all the different NRCS programs in the past. We no longer have those financial challenges. We've got $300 million a year in just RCPP funding. And so it's really a standalone program at this point. Another major change is that we are not going to be operating this program through existing programs. So we will not be entering into EQIP contracts through RCPP any longer. We will not be entering into ACEP easements any longer through RCPP. We will have RCPP contracts with landowners. We will have RCPP easements with landowners. We will have RCPP watershed projects for PL 566 type projects. This is a big change. The statute still includes references to the existing programs like EQIP and ACEP and PL 566, but what it does is it points to those programs as indications of the authorized activities that partners could do through RCPP. So, for example, we can still do land management activities or restoration activities like we do through EQIP and CSP, and even some of our, wetlands restoration easement programs, for example. We can now do land rental type activities because CRP type authorities were brought into the program. We will still be able to do easements. We still have ACEP-like authorities and HFRP, the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, like authorities. But again, exactly the structure of the contract and how those authorized activities will be put together will in large part be dependent on what partners want to do. So again, we're looking at those existing programs as an indication of the types of activities we can do without actually doing EQIP contracts any longer. Another big change, certainly for our partner participants, is that the statute allows for project management and producer outreach to be eligible technical assistance expenses. We had some challenges the first go around with some inconsistent guidance and changing guidance over the years. But certainly it appears as though moving forward that our partners are going to be able to use RCPP funding for some project management and producer outreach expenses. There's a real emphasis in the statute on outcomes, which there was somewhat of an emphasis the first time around, but certainly moving forward, I think USDA leadership is really looking at RCPP to kind of set the tone, a future tone for NRCS in trying to capture project outcomes, which are distinct from deliverables, right? Deliverables are, hey, we're going to do 500 acres of cover crops, we're going to do 2 miles of riparian buffers, we're going to do 6 conservation easements. The outcomes are, hey, what did we actually do for water quality? What did we do for source water protection? What do we do for wildlife habitat populations? Wildlife populations, things like that. And so you can certainly anticipate that there'll be additional emphasis on outcomes in the new RCPP. There's also quite a bit of language in the statute on streamlining, and we're working on a number of ways to make the program easier for our partners to participate in. I say it all the time that we don't really have a good program unless we have partners bringing good projects to the table. And so if we make it really challenging for our partners to participate, we're going to be out of luck. And so we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes here, trying to streamline things for partners and make it easier for them to participate. You can see that in the statute, it requires each NRCS state office to designate an RCPP coordinator, which was not always the case under the old program. And so there'll be a single point of contact in each state for folks to go to for help with application questions and certainly with implementation of projects. A couple other things. There's a new provision for alternative funding arrangements or grant-like projects. This AFA, as we call it, approach was also in the last Farm Bill, but it wasn't really used, and it was, not nearly as explicit as it is in this Farm Bill. What these are again, more grant-like projects, so that, for example, we would give funding directly to a partner to then go out and do conservation, whether it's a pay-for-performance type activity, or, there's irrigation infrastructure is another thing that's called out in the statute as potentially benefiting from an AFA type approach. We're able to do up to 15 of these AFA arrangements each year. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. For this group's interests, source water and drinking water was explicitly brought into the program under the program purpose. Certainly we have a number of projects under the old program that address source water protection, but it was explicitly included along with all the changes that brought source water type language into the Farm Bill in 2018. So that's kind of the highlights for the changes to the program. As I said, we're working furiously here behind the scenes to try and deliver it here in 2019. Because of all the changes, there's a lot of implications for NRCS in how we're able to deliver these new contracts and make sure that producers get paid, how our IT systems are able to be updated so that we can make this program work. We've got, in parallel to working on the next funding announcement, we are working on the RCPP regulation. For those of you interested in this particular tidbit, the old program did not actually have a program rule that governed its administration. The new statute requires us to have one, and so we're working that through the system, and we're looking for the interim final rule for RCPP to come out in late fall or sometime in early winter. We have authority to put out a funding announcement ahead of the interim final rule, and we are working toward that. And at this point, the best I could say is we're looking at sometime later this summer to put out the next RCPP funding announcement. So Karen, with that, I think I'll just sew it up and stick around if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Kari. We really appreciate it. Next up, we'll hear from Jay Gibbs. And Jay, I think your presentation is up on the screen, and we'll advance your slides for you. So just ask us when you want us to change your slide, and we'll go ahead and do that. So go ahead, Jay, take it away. Jay, are you on mute? Jay, we still can't hear you.
Jay, if you could go to the attendees panel on your control panel and to staff and find your name. There you go. Okay.
Are we good now?
Yep, you're good now. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I was running too many machines at once. Thanks and good morning. I'd like to give a special thanks to Julie Harvey from Oregon DEQ that helped me prepare this presentation. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Karen. While you're waiting for that to come up, I'll just get started. Are you on to the next slide, Karen?
We're trying, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll keep going, no problem. Anyway, Oregon utilizes a strategic approach to conservation, and I can say right now that the flip side to being strategic is being opportunistic, and that's definitely the case for Oregon this last round of opportunities. NRCS invited the relevant agency heads to Portland for an afternoon meeting. Every agency had completed a number of assessments. I refer to those as circles on the map. Each agency had different criteria and different priorities. And when you combine that cross-section of criteria, and I'm on to the third slide now, Karen. Well, anyway, we'll just keep going here. So when you take a cross-section of half a dozen of state agencies and NRCS, and you combine their various prioritization, you kind of get a laundry list right there, kind of a laundry list of prioritization criteria, and that's okay, because each agency has a different metric of success, and I think that's part of what made Oregon successful, is respecting that metric of success. When we take a broad resource concern like source water quality, and you roll that out at the local level, next slide, Karen, it begins to look very different depending on what part of the state you're in. Oregon's a very diverse state. We ended up with a nice geographically diverse set of projects. I'll drill down a little bit on the one in the far right corner in Baker City, because that's the one I'm the most familiar with. We're hoping to have all the NWQI assessments completed in 2020, and then move on to the implementation phase. Next slide. Martin referred to this, the partner goals, and I'm kind of keying in on the accelerated conservation practice implementation, and I would add the term focused in there. I think Oregon anticipates having a very few number of practices across a broad landscape, so that we can have a landscape type of effect and move the needle. Next slide, Karen. If you look at the Baker City watershed, this is a little unique, and Kari referred to that as kind of a unique sort of approach. We're not actually treating the watershed itself. And this project was brought to us by the city of Baker, Baker County, and a very locally led effort. We're treating the non-industrial private forest lands that are adjacent to the watershed. There's a high degree, the darker the red color, the more susceptible it is to catastrophic wildfire. If this watershed were to catch on fire, it would devastate the water quality for the city of Baker. To the point that, this year we have two things going on concurrently. They're currently working on the assessment itself, but we know that at the end of the day that the assessment is going to point to pre-commercial thinning and /treatment on non-industrial private forest lands. So here in fiscal year 19, we're already implementing contracts through our general EQIP funds. If we have the opportunity and we're successful for additional EQIP implementation funding through the source water quality, we'll shift that funding out and accelerate it in a much larger, quicker fashion. But we didn't see a need to actually wait for the assessment to come to completion to highlight something as obvious as that everybody sat around and decided that was needed to be done. Go on to the next slide, Karen. If you look at the takeaways, just a couple of them. I think it starts with the partnership at the local level. Like I mentioned, we did sit around in Portland, and we, as agency heads, and we talked about the concurrent circles on the map and where they had overlap. And then that went out to the local level to see what were they ready? Were they prepared? Were they collaborating at the local level? Because I strongly maintain that locally led from the state office is a bit of an oxymoron. The other thing we did is we utilize existing assessments. There was a number of assessments from a broad cross-section of agencies that were already completed. We didn't start from scratch. We leaned on those existing assessments. And then we focused, outreach is a big component. Can't be overstated, the outreach to make sure that we have a ready, well, and able customer base there for the implementation phase. Next slide. A couple more takeaways continued. Drinking water is a real high-profile issue. It impacts a lot of people. So when you roll something like the program like this out, there are a lot of opportunities. And from my perspective, a little closer to the contracting to landowners. Landowners they care a lot about water quality, and I think they really want to be part of the solution. I look forward to this program provides us some opportunities that's going to allow some landowners to be part of the solution. And with that, Karen, that's a wrap for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate it, and I apologize to folks who are participating for the technical difficulties. I think we have too many cooks in the kitchen here. So anyway, next up, we'll hear from Adam Schneeder. Sorry, Adam. So hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very happy to be here to kind of share some of Iowa's story with this, and just kind of and how it relates to our nutrient reduction strategy as well. So in Iowa and a lot of states across the country, I know especially the hypoxia task force states, the 12 states along the Mississippi and Ohio main stem, all have nutrient reduction strategies that they're actively implementing now. Ours was finalized back in May of 2013 with focuses on both nitrogen and phosphorus in the Mississippi, and we're looking for a 45% reduction for nitrogen and phosphorus. And the main component of our strategy and a lot of the state strategies are everyone's in it together, non-point sources and point sources. And so we're looking at, through the science, non-point source ag producers with voluntary implementation of conservation practices, and we're looking at the technology that's available and can be implemented for major wastewater treatment plants for cities and industries. And that's normally my work area, is in the wastewater side of things. So there's a little new space for me. I'm guessing for other folks too. It could be newer, as well as we do a lot of these collaborative approaches. And the strategy, obviously, to get that type of reduction goal across the state is not cheap. We look at point sources and non-point source investments to try to cover that range. You're looking over at the billions of dollars mark to try to hit these types of practice implementation and treatment plan improvements you'll need to see those types of reductions in our nitrogen phosphorus export leaving the state of Iowa. One of the things with the focus on kind of the everyone's in it together ag-urban collaboration and the work of the Iowa Ag Source Water Collaborative, learned about the work going on with source water protection in the state. That's been happening for a while, but became more aware of it as these two, the strategy and source water protection, obviously are a good fit because that's exactly where we can get a lot of ag-urban participation in some of these watersheds where everyone has ownership of that local source water. They use the water, they recreate there, this type of thing. So there's a lot of common threads there to bring people together for a common effort. And so we see a lot of opportunity with some of these some opportunities with the new opportunities, you could say, that's coming from NRCS here. We have 36 million acres of land area in Iowa. 30 million acres is in ag production. About 90% of Iowa's municipal wells are located in agricultural areas, and it's true of the surface waters as well. So it's kind of a target-rich environment for us to take advantage of some of these new flexibilities. So I'm going to share some examples of where we're able to look at some of these new opportunities in Iowa. So how do we get started? And for all the memo nerds out there like me that enjoy some of these things, for us in this specific example was a memo from EPA titled Renewed Call to Action to Reduce Nutrient Pollution and Support Incremental Actions to Protect Water Quality and Public Health. It's kind of a mouthful, but hidden in that memo, there was a modest amount of technical assistance funding available nationwide to look at nutrient reduction. And we focus on a few different things, but we applied for that funding and received an award to do source water protection planning and our focus was going to be on lakes, surface water lakes that also serve as a source water for nearby communities. We know a lot of those types of practices to protect the lakes are the same things that we are looking to put across the landscape in Iowa to meet our nutrient reduction goals. So a lot of the same types of practices. We were awarded that funding, and we had two cities that expressed interest in moving forward with this, had some partnerships already built locally with the city councils, ag organizations, the rural water associations, conservation agencies, landowners, farm operators, agribusiness, kind of the main body of what makes up the Iowa Ag Source Water Collaborative. And so there was already some of these relationships built. So we confirmed that interest to move forward with that, and we completed those plans, which are very similar to what Dee and Martin were describing as far as what you would need to move to the implementation phase. And so we were kind of in a fortunate position there. So we got that completed in February of 2008, and I'll just kind of describe some of the things that are part of that, give you a little feel for the landscape of where these are at. And Spirit Lake was one of the communities there, northwest Iowa, a flatter part of the state. The Spirit Lake is part of that, what's called the Iowa Great Lakes. There's a series of large natural lakes in that area. And then if you look at Winterset further in the kind of that third tier of counties in Iowa, you see a lot of the green dots that indicate surface water supplies. That area is hillier, so a lot of impoundments make up that area. The kind of that northwest area is where we have a lot of more of the natural pothole lakes, and southern Iowa, almost all of those would be impoundments. So kind of different variety, different landscapes, so which ultimately mean different practices. To give you an idea of the kind of the sizes here, Winterset has a population of 5,200 people approximately. The lake size in this case is 90 acres. Watershed size is about 10,000 acres, and it was built in 1939, and they recently dredged it for a significant cost to get some capacity back, and obviously they want to protect that investment of dredging to keep sediment and soil on the landscape. So here's an example of some of the planning tools that were utilized in that source water protection plan. This was prepared with our partners at the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. You can see Cedar Lake there at the, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's there on the eastern side of that watershed. And what we utilized was the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework that was made by USDA ARS. And basically it locates in places where any practice should go based off the inputs into the model. So if there's a possibility for a terrace, a water and sediment control basin, that's what that WASCOB acronym is, ponds, wetlands, those types of things, it'll place it on the landscape. What it doesn't know is what's already out there. And we completed a mapping project in Iowa where we mapped every single terrace, WASCOB pond, grass waterway in the state. And so we can take our existing things that we map through LiDAR imagery and subtract them from what ACPF produces, and therefore you're finding the real potential of what you can do. And so in this example, in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a saturation analysis that we did, kind of loosely, that shows, that currently there's 52 WASCOBs at 9,600 feet in this watershed, but we could put in 75 more at 24,000 feet. So by count, you're 41% saturated. By feet, 28%. So plenty of room to do more conservation in this watershed, and gives us a good mean of showing progress moving forward. The other example that was part of this planning effort was Spirit Lake, population of 5,100 in the city of Spirit Lake. The lake's Big Spirit Lake has a lake size of 5,600 acres, approximately. The watershed size is about 44,000 acres, and it's Iowa's largest natural lake. So here's a kind of different look at it. It's unique because it does share a border with Minnesota. And here's another example of those existing BMPs being shown on the landscape. And then you can also try to find where there's, and the existing ones are in green, hard to see. The ones that could be possible are in red. So obviously a lot of opportunity there. And so this plan was also funded by the EPA grant. And so this is kind of the type of work that we did to determine what practices were possible and where. And it was also consistent with the priorities of Spirit Lake and Winterset to focus on sedimentation and nutrient reduction. So perfect timing for us. And it's kind of an interesting segue to go back to Oregon. This is where we learned about this pilot project for NWQI. And source water protection at a Association of Clean Water Administrators annual meeting where EPA and NRCS were talking about this very topic. And so we had just kind of completed these plans, and now we were looking for funding sources to implement. And hearing of this opportunity and in Portland from the presentation, quickly hustled back to Iowa and applied. And I think one of the things that was unique and kind of a tip out there, I guess, is a lot of times, at least in our case, our 319 program had coordinated with NRCS already for years on NWQI. And so as far as applying for that, and using the source water protection plan, which is a little different than a 319 9-element plan. We were able to kind of work through that with those built-in relationships already between the state and NRCS for some of those things. So that was a real helpful relationship that we were able to tap into. And so ultimately, we did get approved later on in October, and Cedar Lake was approved for about $700,000 over 5 years, so about $139,000 a year. And Spirit Lake was approved for about $1.3 million over 5 years, $262,000 a year for implementation. So real exciting, and things moved pretty quick. That's why that timing was kind of perfect. Additionally, we're fortunate to have two experienced watershed coordinators in these areas to help move these funds into the implementation. And so that was a real helpful relationship that we had to move this forward. And so to kind of give you a feel for the progress to date, from the case of Winterset for Cedar Lake, again, that priority was sedimentation and nutrients in that watershed. And right now, looks like there's, I don't know if these are contracted out quite yet, but right now it looks like we'll have over 500 acres of cover crops coming up. There's a lot of grass waterways and terraces that will be under contract. And due to some potential slippage in other areas, like I mentioned, I think we had annually we're around 139,000 allocated for Cedar Lake. We were so much demand for practices that we're actually at 236,000 allocated, and so the demand is real high. It's the same story for Spirit Lake and the Big Spirit Lake. Prep style wetland going in a smaller size, 8 acres of prairie buffer strips being put along in certain areas. There's a livestock exclusion watering system that's being funded, 1,000 acres of cover crops, mulch till and no-till under 5-year contracts, grass waterways and alfalfa plantings. And again, I think it was 262 that was allocated, 305,000 that's currently being budgeted so far. And so the demand's real high. And I guess some of the kind of the stories within the stories as I track back to the coordinators in preparation for these remarks today, some of the flexibilities they're just super excited about, which makes me excited too. The 5-year contracts, that was a real, I know folks are pretty excited about that. Allows some of the farmers to tinker with the cover crops a little bit. They might be looking at planting them at different times when the corn may be a little shorter to try to improve germination rates. There's a lot of different things going on because of the 5-year contract. It allows for some of that innovation that may happen. Farm specific, it sounds like. One of the big stories, and I think surprised locally in the Winterset area, with the fact that a lot of the farmers are putting their dollars into this too for their part for cost share when right now the farmers are dealt a pretty bad hand with the flooding in Iowa in addition to commodity prices. And to see people making these investments moving forward with them is very encouraging to the local folks, the soil and water conservation districts. And again, that demand is high, so I know they're looking forward to kind of the next sign-up periods coming forward. And also in these local watersheds, as this construction goes on, it brings in jobs, it brings in people, it brings in that kind of excitement. And so I know folks are pretty geeked out about this, and we're excited to be a part of it. And we have 2 other communities that are looking to kind of follow in the footsteps of Winterset and Spirit Lake. So this is just the start, and hoping to get a lot of Iowa communities doing this type of work moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. And now we're going to hand it over to Jennifer Heyman, who will talk to us about the work that they're doing in the West Virginia and Pennsylvania area. So, Jen?
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this webinar and share our experience in getting involved in one of these projects from a drinking water provider's perspective. So here's a quick overview of what I'll cover over the next few minutes. First, a quick look at the National Water Quality Initiative and introduction to the Source Water Protection Program. We've heard a fair bit about that already. Next, I'll cover a case study of how Pennsylvania American Water got involved and helped select a watershed in PA for this effort. And then we'll look at some lessons learned from the process and resources available to other water providers or their partners who might be interested in this program. So first, a little bit about us. Pennsylvania American Water is a subsidiary of American Water, which is an investor-owned water and wastewater utility regulated by the Public Utility Commission, or PUC, in Pennsylvania. Our roots date back to the early 1800s, and we're now the largest regulated water and wastewater service provider in Pennsylvania. So we serve about 2.5 million people spread across 36 counties, and that includes over 650,000 water customers or connections, the majority of which are residential. We operate 36 surface water treatment plants, and we also rely on groundwater wells to supply water in many areas. There's significant agricultural land use in many of our watersheds, and we, like many other drinking water utilities, have seen related water quality changes over the years. So shifting gears a little bit to the program, the National Water Quality Initiative started in 2012, again, as a partnership between the Natural Resource Conservation Service, state water quality agencies, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The purpose was to identify and address impaired watersheds through voluntary conservation measures. So NRCS provides targeted funding for financial and technical assistance in priority watersheds in need, and where farmers can really use conservation practices to make a difference. Funding for the overall NWQI program has been extended to ensure sufficient resources for multi-year implementation. So as our previous speakers mentioned, in fiscal year 19, NRCS expanded the scope of NWQI to include a source water protection program, and that included both surface and groundwater systems. So this differs from previous NWQI efforts in that there's specific focus on drinking water benefits, whereas some of the past efforts have been more focused on Clean Water Act improvements to impaired water bodies. A pilot phase is established to assist partners in adapting and expanding their source water protection plans. The intent of that was to identify critical source areas that needed support related to agricultural land uses. So a total of 16 source water protection pilot projects were selected for fiscal year 2019, one of which includes our project. And each pilot consists of a readiness and an implementation phase, again, with that multi-year plan and budget allocated through 2023. So the selection criteria for the source water protection program are different from the other NWQI programs that had specific watershed criteria. The priority areas can be independent of the original NWQI watersheds, meaning they don't have to be within a watershed that was previously designated as a priority for water quality improvement. So then the primary criterion for a source water project, as we understand it, is agreement among the partners involved that a given source water protection area is a priority for that state. So to that end, it helps if the proposed areas are delineated through a source assessment and have a source water protection plan already in place. So there are a bunch of other things to consider that are not necessarily explicit selection criteria, but could be important to the success of a given project and must be taken into consideration. So one is having adequate technical capacity in the pilot area to conduct outreach and technical assistance, both from NRCS and from the partners. It also helps to have sufficient demand and interest from the agricultural community to meet project goals. This is especially important as a voluntary conservation program to make sure that you have people on board. Another key factor is the support of partner agencies and organizations in developing and implementing the activities to achieve those project goals. And then other things to consider are availability of monitoring data and the capability to baseline and track water quality improvements to really demonstrate progress over time as the project is implemented. So you may have noticed that partnerships are a really important part of this program. Everybody that has spoken today has mentioned that at some phase. The Source Water Collaborative has developed some really helpful guidance as part of their How to Collaborate toolkit that shows how partners can work together. It includes a series of steps shown here, and that's a link below on the slide, where you can drill down into each step for more information. So one of the tools that we as a drinking water provider found particularly helpful was the guidance on how collaboration can help protect sources of drinking water. I think at a high level, everyone understands the benefits of conservation. However, they might not know where the exact overlaps exist between conservation programs and drinking water programs. So this guidance helps us better understand why that overlap is and how we as a utility might be able to contribute to that effort and get that conversation started. So our first step at Pennsylvania American Water was to reach out to the state conservationists to explain who we are and that we were really interested in learning more about the pilot. The NRCS was already talking with other drinking water agencies, including EPA Region 3 and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and others, to identify specific priority areas for the state. So we partnered with them to talk through some ideas for different watersheds to target. So the initial discussions all happened within a really tight time frame. Last year, we were invited to an initial meeting in August 2018 to discuss some ideas for proposed watersheds. And by September, the proposal was already in and being pushed forward. So to support the selection effort, we gathered a list of the HUC 12 watersheds that supplied Pennsylvania American Water sources that also had an existing source water protection plan and had agriculture listed as one of the main potential sources of contamination. It was really helpful from our perspective to have this list ahead of time so that we could bring it and show the partners where our priorities would be. So we identified 34 different systems in 30 HUC 12 watersheds and then sorted them by priority, designating them as A, B, or C based on the qualitative risk. So generally speaking, if agriculture was listed as a high priority in the plan or there was a history of water quality issues or impairments related to agriculture, we ranked it as an A, and those were our top priorities. So we provided that information to NRCS. At the same time, the state drinking and clean water agencies provided GIS files to other key pieces of information like protection zones, water quality conditions, and existing monitoring networks in place. So then NRCS was able to overlay all these files together with their own resources and use that to support the decision on which watersheds will be moved forward and proposed for the pilot. So basically, the greater the number of criteria or layers that overlap, the greater the likelihood for success. Out of this effort, the state NRCS office selected two areas, Lower Maiden Creek and Swatara Creek. The Swatara Creek is the one that supplies our Hershey water system. It's a tributary to the Susquehanna River that feeds our G.C. Smith water treatment plant. The Swatara has a history of water quality impairments. Our source water protection plan was completed in 2012, and it lists non-point source pollution from agricultural runoff as a high susceptibility. The Swatara Creek was accepted into the pilot program and has since entered the readiness phase, which involves a detailed watershed assessment, as others have mentioned on this webinar, to identify critical source areas needing treatment and effective conservation systems that are amenable to producers. The purpose of this assessment is to inform conservation planning and implementation at the field level. In terms of our involvement and contribution to the project, we are part of the steering committee and we're supporting the project planning efforts. So that includes sharing information from our source water assessment and our utility protection plans, as well as some of our raw water quality data and GIS files for the protection zones and other key areas. We are also helping to compile some references to other available data and resources on the watershed and in various conditions for the readiness phase. And then we'll work with partners involved to monitor for changes in water quality at our intake during implementation. So here are a few of the lessons learned as we got involved in this program. And again, this is from the drinking water provider perspective. First, it's good to start conversations early with both NRCS and Drinking Water Primacy Agency. This goes a long way towards establishing a relationship that can lead to partnership on the ground. And that goes for the Source Water Protection Program as well as any other program, really. In this case, it all happened pretty quickly, but that might always be the case. So it's good to stay in contact and understand where your priorities lie. Second, I would say collaboration is key. This type of effort doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's worthwhile to have the different agencies, partners, and utilities all at the table to talk through some ideas and challenges. This was really helpful in our experience to identify the right priority areas to be put forward for this program. Third, I think it's important to be open-minded to identify and consider mutual goals. We went into this unsure of what to expect, but after talking through some of the options, we were able to collectively help identify a good match. One of the concerns that I hear a lot of times from other water providers, and I've had this thought myself, is that it's hard to tell where to start. Based on this experience, I can say that you don't need to have it all figured out from the start. It's okay to express an interest and see where it leads. Just be willing to ask questions and explore the opportunities that come up out of that. So in summary, the NWQI Source Water Protection Program offers opportunities to specifically address drinking water source issues. Drinking water utilities can take proactive steps to get involved by reaching out directly to their state or local conservationists. Also a good idea to reach out to your drinking water primacy agency to ask about the program and how you can work with them to focus on source areas. The National Source Water Collaborative has developed some great tools and resources to help guide these discussions. One of those is the guidance I mentioned earlier on protecting drinking water sources through agricultural conservation. It can be found at the link here at sourcewatercollaborative.org. AWWA and ASLA also have some helpful resources for water utilities and state drinking water agencies, respectively, and I would recommend checking those out at the links shown here. With that, Karen, I will wrap it up and hand it back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. Thanks for being on, and thanks on behalf of the Source Water Collaborative. Thanks for the plug of the resources that we have. So let me just remind folks that you can enter your questions into the question box. Hold on a second, sorry. You can enter your questions into the questions box, and I'm going to go ahead and read those questions and direct them to each of the participants. Oops. Sorry. Oh, shoot. So again, type your questions into the question box on your screen, and we'll go ahead and try to answer those. And I just am going to put these resources up here. I know that Jen just mentioned some of them, but I'll put them up here as well. The NRCS also has some, and again, lots of resources on the Source Water Collaborative, both on our conservation toolkits as well as our learning exchange. So, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and start down some of these questions. I'm going to try to group some of them together. Dee and Martin, I'll let either one of you take these. There's a couple of questions here on how priority watersheds are determined and the criteria that's necessary for getting those watersheds into the NWQI program. I think for the most part, a number of our speakers have addressed that, but maybe if you want to just recap, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So just to reiterate, for watersheds to enter into NWQI to be submitted for consideration, for the ones that are for an impairment, specifically more towards the Clean Water Act watersheds, the eligibility criteria for those is simply that it is either listed on Section 5 of the integrated report, or has a TMDL in place, or in some other way has an impairment that can be demonstrated, and that is agricultural sources may contribute to that in some way. That's the key criteria for watersheds. And then for source water protection areas, as Martin mentioned and others mentioned, these do not have to be impaired. These can be protective projects in nature. The only eligibility criteria is that these are considered priorities that are determined by drinking water partners. And so just to emphasize, you know, NRCS works with state water quality agencies and our drinking water partners to determine the priorities that they want to put forward for NWQI.
Great. Thank you so much, Dee. And just I wanted to, there's a couple people that have wanted clarity of when those, I know you mentioned that the bulletin is due out hopefully this or next week, and those applications will be due in, did you say September or October?
They'll be due September 20th
Right.
of this year.
Right. And there was another question just for clarity, and I think I know the answer to this, but there is no monitoring requirement for the drinking water side of the NWQI. Is that correct?
So NRCS does not have a monitoring requirement for NWQI at all. We like to have partners that can come on board and bring this to the table when possible, but we don't have that requirement. Only for NWQI, EPA requires that one NWQI watershed per state is monitored for to determine conservation impact. So NRCS does not have a water quality monitoring requirement.
Great, thank you. Then we also had a question about, and this says, does the sponsor need to fund the assessment and implementation plan studies? And that was
so I think it depends on how you want to do it. If we're talking about using the readiness phase in NWQI, then NRCS can provide resources to assist with the assessment. That includes funding that could be used to help with the analysis. The implementation plan is really just a simple spreadsheet template. This is something that NRCS staff is responsible to develop, and it really just is a summarization of key elements that are in the assessment.
Great, thanks, Dee. I had another question here on whether or not, and this could, I guess, be for anyone there, is if NRCS envisions being or anticipating if any of the PFAS, the polyfluoroalkyl, will be part of or eligible through any of the NRCS funding programs.
Well, that's at this time, that's not something that we've considered, and our understanding is that's much more related to airports and military facilities, and it doesn't seem to be, as far as we know now, a nexus with agriculture. So I'm not sure that our the assistance that we can bring would be relevant to the PFAS issue. So at this time, we don't see that connection.
Okay. Yeah, I think probably what the participant is getting at is that there is some concern that some of these are being applied through as biosolids onto field application for fertilizer and things like that. So it's showing up in some areas because of that use. So that might be something that we talk about further down the road, but that's probably where that's coming from, is that they're finding them in the biosolids.
Okay.
Thanks, Martin. Let's see. Can NRCS fund source water protection projects that are related to wastewater projects as well?
Well, I mean, we can fund source water protection projects, and if there's a need for, if there's a related need with wastewater, I think that's an added bonus. If there's a source water protection need, I think that it fits it fits within these developed source water assessments that we reference in our guidance about how we identify the source water protection areas, that it fits. But there may be more nuance there that we're not understanding right now.
Yeah, sorry, it's not clear in the question either. So, another question came in about specifically, Kari, for you, if you're still on the line, for RCPP, that there's been some challenges in the past with people that are familiar with that program and working on it, more on the emphasis on species. Do you know if the changes to the RCPP program delivery, is there a possibility that the HFRP will be broadened in the new Farm Bill to include source water protection?
Again, the way that RCPP works is, moving forward after the 2018 Farm Bill is going to be quite substantially different from the way that it worked previously. Again, we will not be having HFRP easements any longer. We'll have RCPP easements that could potentially be forestry related, could even be source water protection related. So folks will just have to stay tuned once we were able to get the funding announcement and the interim final rule out to get a better handle on exactly how all this is going to work.
Great. Thank you, Kari. And then also there's a question. It says NRCS typically has restrictions on funding certain landowners. Is there consideration for broadening the audience of potential funding recipients? Some of the challenges are to find cooperative landowners. Also, is NRCS planning on assisting with outreach to landowners in relationship to the source water protection projects? And I'll let any of you at NRCS answer that question.
Well, for NWQI, we follow the same rules as the underlying program. So NWQI isn't a different program authority. And so what that means is the normal EQIP or Environmental Quality Incentive Program rules apply. So those, those basic rules about producer eligibility are based on the larger program and not NWQI in particular.
Great. Thanks, Martin.
So I guess one thing that was changed with this Farm Bill was that an authority came back that had been gone for a while, and that is the ability to waive AGI. So there's some producer, there's a basic eligibility requirement that we can't enter into contracts or provide financial assistance to producers who have a certain adjusted gross income, so a higher than a threshold, but that there's a provision for that restriction to be waived by the Secretary for lands of special environmental significance. I think those rules for doing that will come out in the regulation that's being published for EQIP, or the updates to the EQIP reg. I can't speak specifically to that, but that's something that you can work with your local or state offices.
Great, thanks, Martin. And Adam, somebody asked if you would be willing to share what you use to create your maps.
Yeah, sure. I guess which one? As far as the application that's used, or the tools that were used behind the scenes. I guess if there's more clarity on that question, I'd be happy to provide that information.
Okay, yeah, that's all they asked, so I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, if the person's still listening, feel free to reach out to me specifically. I'd be happy to help out and get you what you need.
Or you can type it in the chat box if you have specifics that you're asking for, or the questions box. And then is there support within the conservation programs for implementing productive agriculture opportunities that provide continuous living cover and ecosystem services at the same time protecting source water? Not sure I fully understand that question, but maybe it makes sense to you guys.
Well, so that's a broad question. It sounds like what the participant here is talking about is something like a perennial crops. That what we're working with generally in our in National Water Quality Initiative and these other tools are the practice standards that we have available within NRCS Field Office Technical Guide. So, that full library of practices and those that are identified in the watershed assessment as being beneficial in addressing the impairments or threats can be used. And so there's a lot of latitude within those practice standards. So if there's something like a conservation cover or other broad standard that fits that. The other thing is then I'm going to kind of throw this over the fence to Kari. If there are things that don't currently exist within our conservation practice standards, the existing ones, there are opportunities to develop new or interim practice standards through the conservation innovation grants and take other innovative approaches. So I guess it depends on whether within NWQI we're working with the library of conservation practices that we have, and again there's flexibility there. And then if you're looking to support new practice standards or other innovations, then SIG would be more the route that you could follow. And I don't know whether, Kari, if you have anything to add to that.
That's right, Martin. There's also certainly opportunities for innovation within RCPP. It sounds a little bit, with that continuous living cover language, that there may be a soil health angle to that question. Soil health, just like source water protection, was sprinkled throughout Title II of the Farm Bill, the conservation title. Lots of new sort of soil health emphases within our programs, including a new component of conservation innovation grants known as the Soil Health Demo Trial, which is actually a competition that's open right now. It's part of a larger on-farm conservation innovation trials funding opportunity that's $25 million this year. It's open right now. You can find it on grants.gov, and it's really an effort to increase the adoption of soil health management systems and practices by producers, and also to evaluate the impacts of producers implementing soil health practices and systems. So just wanted to put that plug out there.
Great. Thanks so much. And then another question came in, and I think this is a general for any of you for NRCS. And the question was if any of the programs provide funding for land acquisitions that could be held by land trusts, and specifically thinking about forest and silviculture.
This is Kari. Fee simple acquisition, specifically no, but with respect to conservation easements, certainly within RCPP, there's the opportunity to have entity-held conservation easements, and that entity could be a land trust, for example.
Great, thanks, Kari. And then I think that we did give some examples of some of the, I think Jay was able to give us some of the examples from the state of Oregon, the type of projects, but there was also another question, particularly Martin or Dee, if you could give any examples of those pilot projects that were accepted in for the funding in 2019, the 15 pilot projects. Can you give any examples of what some of those projects were? Beyond what we've already provided from Oregon?
Well, I think
Right,
the
and
ones that were funded, actually, we were lucky to have Adam on the call here, and he described a couple of the Iowa ones, and those were actually I think the only ones that received implementation funding for 2019. The other source water protection pilots were readiness phase, and they got funding for the assessment, developing assessments and implementation plans. But the Iowa ones, the work that Adam shared with you positioned them to be ready to start implementation as soon as they put in their application. So that's really the best example.
Right. I know that just to also help with that question, I'm not sure if beyond the examples that we gave, there was, as Martin said, there was, and Dee said, 15 pilots that represented 9 different states. So there was also Hawaii and I think West Virginia and Connecticut. And I'm remembering maybe one in Nebraska as well. So anyway. And I think we're just coming up about, we're 1 minute from ending this, and I think I've been able to get through all the questions as well. And I just wanted to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting the recording on the Learning Exchange website, where that's source water protection through conservation funding, as well as updating the page with a variety of new resources, including some of the ones that several of our participants referred to from AWWA and some other things. So please visit our website, and all of this will be posted in the coming days. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thanks so much, everyone.